decided to start playing the Metal Gear Solid series. You know, I've had multiple copies of the games for years. I just never got into them before, mainly because, you know, the control scheme was terrible and still is terrible. I don't know if anybody who complained about Resident Evil's control scheme has ever played Metal Gear Solid, but it's got the worst camera and control scheme that I think I've ever experienced in a game, especially on the PlayStation 1. I remember playing Siphon Filter and having a much better time in the spy genre than I did playing Metal Gear Solid. But somehow, aside from the terrible controls and camera, the game was actually pretty awesome. And, you know, the 45-minute cutscenes were good, and I find that that's what has sustained me through the series. I've finished 1, 2, and 3 now, and I'm working on Portable Ops for the PSP, and I've beaten Metal Gear for the MSX. And the gameplay has surprisingly stayed the same, or at least very similar, from the MSX version of Metal Gear all the way up through Metal Gear Solid 2. In Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, the re-release, they let you actually have control over the camera angle, so it's not stuck in awkward positions. And I don't know what's driving myself to keep playing these games. The storyline must be good, even though it's the most confusing thing you'll ever play. But, you know, in the course of 3 weeks, I've played through 1, 2, and 3, and I just keep going. I don't know if it's because I need to see where the story is going, because, like I said, the story makes absolutely... well, I won't say it makes no sense, but it takes a long time to get where it's going. And, you know, I wanted to get the games all finished before the next, you know, Metal Gear Solid games come out. Not necessarily Rising. I plan on playing Metal Gear Rising as soon as I finish the rest of the series. I should be working on 4 soon. But the Metal Gear Solid series is definitely one of the most frustrating games that I have played in recent times. Maybe that's because, you know, I've been stuck in the rut of playing first-person shooters that are all basically get to the end of the level, shooting as many things as possible. So it's hard to take that step back into adventure gameplay or stealth gameplay where, you know, the system's limits are kind of working with the game's enemy AI to, you know, make it an actual challenge to get through. So that's probably why I'm enjoying these games, because subconsciously it's, you know, back to the old school way of playing video games where you have boss fights where you have to figure out, you know, the pattern of when I'm supposed to attack, when I'm supposed to stay hidden. You know, you actually have to get health packs, although in Snake Eater your health regenerates, but you need to continuously replenish your stamina. So they add a lot of very, you know, interesting elements. Even though they're old games, they were definitely interesting at the time as well. They look great. I've been playing them on I played the PlayStation 1 version of Metal Gear Solid, and, you know, that's the same way it's always been. But I've been playing Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 on the Vita with the HD collection, and they look great. Even by today's standards, everything looks awesome. The acting is good, the voiceovers are good, the cutscenes are good, although incredibly long. I find myself playing for about 4 minutes, and then another 20-minute cutscene, and then another 4 to 10 minutes of gameplay, and then another 20-minute cutscene. So they really, really want you to know their story, and if you skip the cutscenes, it's almost pointless, because, you know, that's why people play Metal Gear Solid, is for the cutscenes. I'd have to say Metal Gear Solid 3 is probably my favorite one, and that might only be because of the fact they finally opened up the camera and you could swivel it to be behind Snake or above Snake or wherever you wanted it to be, and not just locked in that static, mostly over the top-down camera view. But there was, you know, a lot in Snake Eater that I thought was really good. It really did the best versions of what 1 and 2 were trying to do, but the bosses seemed to be much easier. And, you know, even the final bosses were pretty easy, but, you know, Metal Gear is one of those series where, you know, you play a boss fight and you're playing that boss fight for some time, because you've got boss fight part 1, boss fight part 2, boss fight part 3, all fighting the same person over the course of, you know, 2 to 3 to 4 different stages of that fight. And that gets a little annoying, especially when all I want to do is see the next cutscene. But I'm looking forward to playing the newer ones, Metal Gear Solid 4, and the ones that are in development now, Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain, which still isn't supposedly a Metal Gear game, but it probably is. I'm looking forward to seeing how well you can play a sneaking game where you're in charge of the camera. Like Tenchu or like Splinter Cell or Siphon Filter. I liked at least Tenchu and Siphon Filter. I haven't played much Splinter Cell, but especially on PlayStation 1, you were doing the same general ideas. You were sneaking, you were trying to use as much stealth as possible, you weren't fighting giant walking tanks, but it was still the same idea of limited confrontation and, effective attack and hide. Metal Gear made it a little bit harder because they wanted to keep that the camera angle that basically they had in the MSX or NES version, where it was more or less top down, and you saw above Snake more or less. But with opening up the camera, I think that it turns it into a completely different experience and a much better game. And now I'm playing Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops on the PSP. And it's surprisingly good. The graphics look good. They're not obviously on par with PlayStation 2 games or the PlayStation 3 games, but it looks good. It's broken up much differently than the other Metal Gear games. It's more, mission-based. You beat a mission, it ends. You go on to the next mission, it ends. You go on to the next mission, it ends. It's not just one continuous playthrough unlocking cutscenes. And it lacks cutscenes, actually. All of the story-driven sections of the game are displayed like comic book drawings, so that's a little different. And there's no audio for the codex or for characters talking in the environment unless you're in a cutscene, which is a comic book presentation. You don't hear dialogue, which is a little different, because you're used to hearing Snake talk for 45 minutes to somebody about either something nonsensical or something incredibly plot necessary. It's Peace Walker. Our Portable Ops is, I've been reading up on what the better PSP one is. Most people seem to think Peace Walker, one that was released a little bit later, is the actual legitimate Metal Gear experience. It was included on the HD collection, which has Metal Gear Solid 2, 3, and Peace Walker, so it skips over Portable Ops. It's got more of the actual Metal Gear feeling to it, and I'm looking forward to playing that one too. It's supposed to be really well received. And another interesting thing the Metal Gear series is doing is it basically tells two stories at the same time about two characters that'll end up in the middle. You have Solid Snake, which is the protagonist from Metal Gear, Metal Gear 2, Metal Gear Solid, and the beginning of Metal Gear Solid 2. And then you have Big Boss, who is the antagonist from Metal Gear and the main character of Metal Gear Solid 3, Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops, and Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. And it shows you the development of Snake throughout the first half of the series, and then Big Boss, who was Snake's commanding officer and then eventually becomes the bad guy in the original game. So it's interesting to see how they're taking a story that's spanned both decades in plot details and decades in development, and how they're trying to make them come full circle and show you how one hero from one series can become the villain in another. It's definitely an ambitious series, and I'm looking forward to keep playing through the games and hopefully sticking with it, because I have a problem with not finishing most of the games I play. But like I said, I've muscled my way through this one, and I'm haven't slowed down yet. So soon enough, I should be done with the series, and then hopefully I can talk about a much grander plot detailed analysis, which is probably impossible to do. Although Game Trailers, the website Game Trailers, does an awesome retrospective on all kinds of video games. They have the Zelda retrospective, which is awesome. They have the Metal Gear retrospective, Castlevania. Very cool stuff if you don't feel like playing the whole game, but you want to see the evolution of the games over, like Metal Gear, for instance, over the course of 25 years. We have, games like Call of Duty, where it's been around for 10 years, and we can see, the advances there. But it's when you have a franchise like Metal Gear, and it's been around for 25 years, it's always interesting to be able to watch the progression of a series stick as close to the roots as possible. I mean, it's interesting how a game that's 25 years old can stick more closely to the roots of an 8-bit, starting point than games that are only a few and series entries into the series. Most people have complained about the changes to Dead Space 3, about how it's more action, less horror, co-op, and everyone's complaining about that, and it's the third game. Metal Gear has 25 years and a dozen games, and they all share a lot of gameplay elements, and it doesn't, they go to show you, Kojima shows you that it doesn't matter the hardware you're on, you can still present a decent game with the same mentality for 25 years. It's a very good series. If you haven't played it, I definitely recommend you playing it. It is frustrating, especially if you hadn't played it before. If you're going back, it's hard for a lot of people to go back and play PlayStation 1 era games because of the limits. I found myself, when the DualShock controller started, I found myself doing as much as possible to stay using the D-pad, because that's what I had been used to using from the 80s all the way up to PlayStation 2. And now it's the opposite. I'm so used to using the analog sticks that going back to using the D-pad is a little annoying. Although you can use the analog stick in Metal Gear, but the whole control scheme just feels very weird. Shooting is terrible. And the actions of crouching and standing up is the most frustrating thing I've ever done in a video game. It's not fluid, in my opinion. But something will keep you playing these games regardless of the questionable gameplay. Like, I thought the combat mechanics in the original two Metal Gear games for the MSX made a lot more sense than the combat mechanics in the Metal Gear Solid series. But again, confrontation is supposed to be limited in these games, so shooting, they'll tell you that. They'll tell you you're not supposed to kill people. It's supposed to be as confrontational less as possible. But then you'll get into these boss fights where you're forced to fight people, and the camera and the controls and the shooting mechanics just are a hindrance to you. But like I said, something will keep you playing these games because you want to know what whichever snake you're playing as, is going to be up to next. So definitely check out these games. They're awesome. It's basically, if you thought Heavy Rain was playing a movie, you haven't played Metal Gear Solid. That is playing a movie, and you're just in charge of filling up the time until the next scene. So, Metal Gear Solid, the HD collection's awesome, although it's missing some of the core games, Metal Gear 1, because you can just download it and people don't care, and Portable Ops, which is basically the gap between Metal Gear Solid 3 and Peace Walker. Check them out.
Ocelot, you did it again. Sorry, boss.